Hey, what's going on, everyone? Okay, let's see here. Boom. Perfect. Okay, let's see. Excuse me. Trying to share this to. Okay, cool. Okay. All right, guys. So we'll wait a little bit to jump. We'll wait a little bit to begin. Starting a little bit late, as usual. So my fault. Apologies for that. So you guys, we'll be talking about low back pathologies. And this isn't for, those little kind of tweaks in the lower back that people have and then they kind of go away and then you never have it again. This is more for people that kind of struggle with chronic low back pain. Chronic being, it's not like every single day. That's very rare, but it's kind of persistent and it's ongoing. And usually what happens is people get into this kind of revolving back pain door club. And basically what happens is they have some kind of injury and it takes a few months and they happen to get better from it. Most people do. And then 6 months later or 12 months later, or maybe even 2 years later or 3 years later, they have another pretty serious re-injury, usually in the same area. But sometimes in a different area or in the same area and then another different area which compounds the problems, etc., etc. Jose, good to see you. Let me know if I pronounce everyone's names correctly. That's oftentimes literally the toughest part for me most always. So we'll be talking about low back pathologies today. And if you guys have any questions at all, just let me know. The most common orthopedic injury is that poor L5-S1 disc. And pretty much almost literally everyone has an episode of kind of serious low back pain at least once in their life. Everyone knows someone that's either struggling with it currently or has had it or they have had it, etc., etc. So guys, with a lot of my information, these aren't quick fixes because especially with chronic health issues, any chronic health issue, not only oftentimes do you have to educate the person on their pathology or what's causing their injury, in this case, the low back, but you also have to look at the person's belief system, belief structure, their daily movement patterns, their diet, how, the human body is composed of 12 human systems, how all of those human systems are doing, because they're all interconnected. Yes, they could be described as different, 12 human systems. You got reproductive system, the hormonal system, respiratory system, skeletal system, muscular system, etc., etc., the central nervous system, on and on, but they really work as just one unit. And it's so important to see that because for example, what are you going to do, Eric? Good to see you. What are you going to do without your liver? How's your brain going to function? Or what's the rest of your body going to do without your brain or your heart? You know what I mean? Et cetera, or your small intestine or your large intestine, stuff of this sort. So it's important to look at these because inevitably, if a person has one system that's not functioning well, it kind of has a dragging down effect on the entire living organism. In the extreme case, the person gets very, very sick and just dies, for example. But in most cases, they just have these kind of chronic health issues that persist for long periods of time, basically throughout their life. And it's like, if it's not one thing, it's another, et cetera, et cetera. And then unfortunately, they get into this habit of chasing symptoms. So they kind of maybe cure one symptom or learn how to manage it properly. And then 5 years later, another symptom pops up. So not only do they have this original symptom, but then another symptom. And then usually, a lot of people just get on a bunch of medical drugs, but chronic use of those medical drugs oftentimes disrupts the person's biochemistry a tremendous amount. So it creates its own problems, et cetera, which then need to be managed. And you can kind of see how it becomes very complicated and just quite annoying actually to have to deal with all of these symptoms all of your life on top of dealing with all of the external world pressures, making sure you hit your deadlines at work, stand out in the workplace. Then you got personal life issues, et cetera, and it's just quite unbearable. for a lot of people, which is why one of the reasons why burnout is so common in the Western culture, you know, especially with 9 out of 10 Americans right now being metabolically sick, and 8.5 out of 10 either being overweight or obese, okay? And it's 2025, Americans are also on a gargantuous amount of medical drugs. In fact, on more medical drugs than any human in human history, all 28 human species, but yet still remain also mentally and physically the sickest humans in all of human history. So it's important to have an honest discussion about this and bring upon honest solutions instead of throwing more medical drugs or symptom management approaches to healthcare at the problem, which clearly hasn't worked over the last 50 or 60 years because Americans have gotten so abysmally sick. It's kind of crazy. So you guys, low back pain. With a lot of my stuff, again, no quick fixes here because there are not going to be any quick fixes, okay? Because if all these quick fixes worked, we would all be fixed by now. So they don't work, okay? Especially with complicated, intricate details of the human body. There are no absolutes. Even the same injury on subject A, let's say they have the same disc injury as subject B, the reasons they actually attain those injuries could be vastly different, and their pain triggers could be vastly different. So it needs to all be approached from a unique individual perspective, which is why I always stress, if you go to a healthcare provider, whether it be a chiropractor, an MD, or a personal trainer, and they're not spending an honest 2 to 3 hours with you upon first meeting you, questioning you about your lifestyle, what led to the symptom, etc., but they just kind of hover around the discussion of your symptom, and then kind of basically 5 minutes later either get you on the treadmill, like signing the waiver with the trainer, or whatever, chatting 5 minutes with your doctor, and they kind of already diagnose you with something, and basically their solution is like, here's some medical drugs, and come back 3 months later and let me know how you're feeling, etc. So that's so important, especially when dealing with low back pathologies that are chronic. Because when you hear the phrase low back pain, it's so general and so vague, it literally says nothing. It's kind of like saying the car isn't starting. Okay, cool. Like, I don't know anything about cars personally, but if the car doesn't start, it's like, what is it? Is it out of gas? You know, are the batteries done? You know what I mean? Is the starter just not working? Have we lost the keys? Are we locked out of the car? You know, whatever. There could be a myriad of other reasons. And it's the same exact thing with low back pain. It's like when you have low back pain, what's causing it? Could it be like a Schmerl's node? So when there's too many compressive penalties on that poor spine for one reason or another, oftentimes what you get is the disc material, the intervertebral disc material that is present between the two bones, breaks through the end plates. So the vertebrae, they have end plates that separate basically the skeleton portion of the spine with that soft disc tissue in between the spine that's composed basically of water and collagen for the most part. And what happens is if there's too much pressure, I wish I had a kind of like a little demo here, but if there's too much pressure on those poor discs, what happens is the disc material breaks through the end plate into the bone, okay? And it creates kind of like an indent. And is it that? Is your back pain caused by spondylolisthesis? Okay, so a lot of times this kind of looks like a slipped disc. So you have the vertebral bodies and they kind of slip like this, and it's quite horrifying to see if you do get an MRI or an X-ray. And if you do have serious back pain, I would recommend opting for an MRI, which will give you a lot more information than an X-ray. An X-ray is not too informative in general. It just kind of scans the hard tissue, like the vertebral bodies of the spine, and sometimes you can kind of gauge at what's going on depending on the positions of the vertebrae, and especially how far away they are from one another. It could indicate kind of like a past disc injury and now the disc has lost a bit of its volume. Or, I hate this phrase because it means nothing, and if a person says this, if a health professional says degenerative disc disease, that's just a good way of saying we don't know how to assess your spine properly, and we don't want to dig deeper into it, basically. because that is such a useless phrase as well. It's kind of quite as useless as you have low back pain, you know. Nars, good to see you. Eric as well. So if you hear those two things, like degenerative disc disease or something like this is just genetics because your parents had it, like, dude, just, I would run so far away and find someone else, especially if they're spending like 5 or 10 minutes just chatting with you about such a complicated topic that has so much little nuance to it, okay? And so, like, what is it? Do you have a Schmoll's node? Good to see you, Nars. Do you have spondylolisthesis? Do you have a posterior lateral disc herniation to the left side or the right side? Or is it herniating anteriorly as well? So is it on multiple levels? Sometimes people have a posterior lateral disc herniation on the L5-S1, and they have an anterior lateral disc herniation to the left side of the, let's say, L1 and L2. So there's like 5 different discs and vertebral bodies in the low back. Which one is it? And which one is causing you pain? Because to add more complexity to it, most people that have protruding disc material, whether it's a disc bulge, dynamic, or straight up disc herniation, which the nucleus pulposus material broke through the annulus fibrosus material, most people actually don't have any pain. It could be just poking away from the nerve root or just not causing any pain, etc. And sometimes, unfortunately, some people just have like even like a 1/4 millimeter disc bulge, and it's unfortunately pushing right on the nerve. Because oftentimes with back pain, you could get arthritic pain when the facets start rubbing against each other due to excessive disc narrowing or volume loss. But oftentimes what people are feeling in their back isn't so much in their back pain as more over nerve pain. It's when like your disc is composed of basically a superior end plate, an inferior end plate, but in between you have this thing called a nucleus pulposus, which is this gel-like material in the middle of the disc, and a whole bunch of like onion-looking rings that surround it called the annulus fibrosus. And over time, due to poor mechanics, poor diet, what happens is that nucleus pulposus material breaks through those rings and eventually breaks through the very last one and creates a disc bulge or a disc herniation and presses on the nerve root at that level. So if it's like posterior lateral disc herniation, the left side of the L5-S1. So it's pushing on the L5 nerve root, and thus could cause the stereotypical sciatic pain, which kind of runs down the butt, the hamstring, sometimes to people like all the way down to the calf, to the foot, and even to the toe, and et cetera, et cetera. But which level is the pain on? That's important to understand too, because sometimes people can get an MRI done and they have 2 disc herniations. Let's just say L1, L2, and L4 and L5, right? But which one is actually causing you the pain? Because if you were to just get that scan done and show it to a surgeon, they'll probably just cut both out. And remember, surgeries are, you have to take it very, very seriously. It definitely, in my opinion, has to be the absolute last resort, because once the surgery is done, there's no going back. You know, the material is cut out. And there is no also guarantee that the pain will disappear either. And in fact, most people that have back surgeries, the pain disappears initially, which gives them false hope, but comes back, you know, a year or 2 later because of a myriad of reasons. Most often, they were just never educated on what caused their pain and how to improve their mechanics, how to lose weight, and a myriad of other things that are weighing down their body's capacity to heal appropriately, et cetera, okay? So another common thing is maybe the person just has stenosis, you know, so it's kind of narrowing of the spinal canal, which presses on the spinal cord, which causes a lot of like usually persistent dull achiness and could lead to oftentimes a lot of pain as well, you know. But it's important to identify like what is happening, you know what I mean? Like, okay, you have low back pain, but what in your back is actually hurting? And getting that appropriate assessment and diagnosis is key, because if you have a false conclusion of why you're having pain, you can't come up with the right solution, unless it's, you know, the very rare 1 in 100 just dumb luck and you happen to land on it. But luck, it could work sporadically, sometimes rarely, but it never works long term either. If you rely on luck and you don't rely on good assessment skills and a good systematic way of getting a person to heal, a predictable way, okay? Which is going to vary from person to person. So group training and stuff of this sort in this kind of situation would be a pretty terrible idea. You need a good 2 to 3 hour assessment minimum, okay? Before beginning anything, a good thorough diagnosis, ideally a mechanical assessment combined with a verbal assessment and combined with imaging. I'm a huge believer in imaging, you know, if you have that accessible to you, but some people say it's not necessary for the most part. So, et cetera, et cetera. So that is so important, guys. And a lot of people you're seeing, like surgeons and chiros and, you know, PTs with PhDs, et cetera, they're getting paid good money. And you have to hold them accountable to giving proper assessments, okay? And there is an art to the assessment process. I got a lot of my skills from Paula Check and Stuart McGill, and also Brian Carroll. Hired him for a very long time. He was a very influential figure for me. And then just my self-study as well. I'm still an avid reader, graduated from UCI in 2009, so it's been a long time. But I still love reading, love educating myself on anything, you know, physical and mental health related, biodynamic farming, et cetera, et cetera. So this is important. And you have to get a proper assessment done, and a proper assessment takes like 2 to 3 hours to do. And then the treatment program itself requires, I found, a good amount of follow-up with the individual, because you oftentimes need to teach them, reteach them how to move properly, and also, you know, oftentimes fix their diet a tremendous amount, encourage them to lose like 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds, because that's providing a lot of shear and compression penalties on the spine all day, being that overweight, on and on and on, okay? So there's a lot of nuance to cover, but what I'm trying to show you guys is that this is critical to be conscious of if you're looking for honest answers. If you're looking for quick, like, false hope solutions that may provide some short-term, a little bit relief, but then it always comes back, you're not going to find that on this live for sure. So that's one. Make sure you get a proper assessment. Remember that the phrase low back pain, it's too vague. You have to be a lot more specific. Like, what is it in your low back? What mechanical cause in your low back is causing you pain? And really look for that 2 to 3 hour assessment. That's critical, okay? So a second step, let me get a sip here, is the person needs to be inevitably, Richie, good to see you. The person needs to be inevitably educated on their pain trigger. So this requires, usually what I do with clients is I sit down with them like an hour minimum in the beginning, just to kind of gauge at their lifestyle. Are they sitting often at work? Because, you know, the natural position for a human body, which basically hasn't even changed in like 250,000 years, is just having low intensity dynamic movement all day, so that way the pressures and tensions throughout your body are dissipated equally. But when you're like sitting for 8 hours a day, or in any static position, a lot of times people are like, well, just have a standing desk for 8 hours a day. Anytime you maintain any one position for prolonged periods of time, you create a tremendous amount of muscle imbalances. So various muscles become then overly tight, and various muscles become then overly stretched. And this could kind of lead to various passive tissue creep and various other issues that could lead to an increased chance of injury and stuff of that sort. So, and obviously if you're, you know, sitting, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day, there's no amount of physical fitness that can counter that kind of damage. You know what I mean? So you got to keep that in mind. And is this person working maybe construction? You know, what type of construction? Are they required to be very low to the ground, and they happen to be flexion intolerant? So that needs to be addressed. You know, like flexion causes them pain. So obviously if they're a carpenter and they're very low to the ground, they're going to be under flexion for prolonged periods of time, and probably going to be picking at that scab, as Stuart McGill would say, okay, on all day, hundreds of times a day, and then obviously they're not going to heal. You know, picking a scab, you guys, is kind of like, everyone knows, like, if you have like a huge scar on your arm and you keep picking it, it's not going to heal, you know what I mean? But it's the same exact issue with any injury. Like if you have a disc injury and you keep leaning into your pain triggers, it's going to take, most likely it will actually heal over long periods of time, but it's going to take so much longer. And then the chances of you re-injuring that disc is going to be pretty much 100% within a few year period. And the injury might even be worse, okay? Especially if you're working out and you're getting stronger. That's like, you know, a teenage kid that crashed a car driving a V4. And then you just give them a V8 without re-educating them on how to drive their car more responsibly, et cetera, okay? So this requires like an in-depth education on what is actually causing their pain. That is so important. And usually from my experience of doing this for 20 years now, it's like stuff that's their lifting technique in the gym. There's usually a lot to be addressed there. And then also how they move around throughout the day outside of the gym. There's also a lot to be addressed there as well, gargantuous amount. If no one is even touching this subject with you, if you go to a spine surgeon's office or a personal trainer or a chiro, and they're not, first of all, they're not providing you a 2 to 3 hour assessment, and then they're not, based on that assessment, they're not thoroughly educating you on what is actually causing your pain and how to modify it or avoid it altogether if you don't need it in your schedule to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, run. You are going to get such terrible treatment, I promise you. And I don't care whether they have like a PhD or an MD to their name, or they're the director of like a sports facility. It's literally meaningless, okay? If ask them then, why am I not being provided a 2 to 3 hour assessment? Why am I not being educated based on that assessment, educated on what is actually causing my pain and how to modify and avoid it? It's critical. These questions you need to ask, you guys. You need to ask. They're so important. The third thing, which kind of goes into the second step we talked about, is having a proper movement screen with an individual. Just looking at their movement. What I found most effective is based on their assessment, you gauge at their life demands, and then you screen them for movements that would happen to exist in those life demands. So if they need to do a lunging motion often, or if they're that carpenter, like I mentioned, and they need to be in a very low to the ground position, which most oftentimes people don't have that much hip flexibility. So they get a lot of rounding in their back, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Then you would test them for how competent they are in the movements they need to exhibit on their daily life or the task that they're trying to get better at, if it's a sport maybe, or something of that sort, okay? And this needs to be done. This is huge. It's kind of like, you know, a person keeps crashing their car. Well, let's look at how you're driving the car or taking care of the car. You know, last time you crashed your car, it's because the wheel fell off on the freeway because you didn't even know how to screw on the bolts with enough intensity. You know what I mean? So let's teach you how to put that wheel on correctly, or teach you like, hey, don't drive 120 miles an hour on an off-ramp that's kind of like basically a 90-degree turn. You know what I mean? All this stuff is critically important. And again, if it's not included in your recovery plan, I would run so far away, because you're either dealing with like a business-minded type of health professional, which wants you in and out, and this stuff takes a lot of time, and they don't like that because it kind of puts a lot of friction in this revolving door of patients that they need to see every day, or they're just incompetent, you know? Like a good sign for sure, if you go to a personal trainer and they're like totally incompetent, is basically you show up, they chat with you for like 5 minutes, they have you sign a waiver, and they get you on the treadmill, chat with you a little bit there, and start you on a workout routine. Huge red flag, like run away. If they're throwing you into a group, if you're like a back pain patient and throwing you into a group of 10, 15, whatever, 5 other people that they're coaching at the same time, no. You need to ask for better, okay? Okay, so let's see what we have here. time on education. Yeah. Okay. So this applies to chiros too, guys, because a lot of people, they associate back pain recovery with a chiropractor because the chiropractor specializes in the spine. And some chiropractors, especially if they're coached through like Stuart McGill, for example, or Paul Chek, for sure, they probably take a far more holistic approach to your healing, and they'll spend time looking at your lifting technique, spend time looking at your movement patterns, talking to you about your lifestyle and how you can modify maybe your seated position at work. Maybe you need to spend like 2 hours on a standing desk and 2 hours seated and then go walk midday or something of this sort, whatever. Guys, there are also no absolutes in human health. So don't look, Gavin, good to see you. Don't look for A, B answers where none exist, because you're not going to get the right answers that way. You might get false hope for sure, but you're not going to get the right answers, okay? For what you're looking for in terms of like lasting healing. So you don't have to be in this revolving door back pain club, basically. Like you injure your back and then you're fine for a while, and then you re-injure it, you're fine for a while, you re-injure it, etc., etc. And then eventually you really injure it and have a surgery and they accidentally clip your nerve or whatever, and then you basically you're permanently damaged at that point. Okay, but going back here, you guys, it's so important to screen a person for their lifting technique and then spend many months oftentimes educating this person on how to lift correctly. There's so much nuance in lifting correctly, especially knowing where a person is starting in their journey. Some people are extremely incompetent in their movement patterns or just don't lack any awareness of time and space and how their body fits into there, etc., etc. And at a minimum, you should be touching base with a client on their movement patterns like once a week for like 30 to 60 minutes. At a minimum, especially in the beginning, especially for the first like 3 to 4 months. Especially if they're doing like very complicated compound lifts like a barbell back squat and a deadlift, which I don't think are necessary for literally almost anyone. It requires so much coaching, so much training, and Eastern European Olympians are trained for years, decades on how to do these particular lifts by people that also train for years and decades on how to do those particular lifts, you know? So if you're going into a CrossFit class and they give you a quick 10-minute Q&A on how to do a barbell back squat, well, good luck. You're definitely going to get injured. It's just a matter of time at that point, okay? How do you lift? Okay, so some random things too, you know, like how they lift, but in terms of Eddie, good to see you. Gavin, good to see you as well. Richie. Sometimes can't even read my own writing here. But, okay. So I think you guys got it. Step 4, pretty clear. You know, educate person on how to lift. So let's kind of touch base. We have 3 more things to cover here. But basically, 1, you definitely need a very thorough assessment if you're dealing with chronic low back pain, for sure. And that thorough assessment is somewhere around 2 to 3 hours long, okay? Then you need to identify what is actually causing my back pain, because low back pain is too vague. Degenerative disc disease is degenerative disc disease. It's too vague. The practitioner is not going deep enough in their assessment, so you should kind of hold them accountable to that, okay? In-depth education on their pain triggers. Once you figure out, hey, it's you have spondylolisthesis in the L4, L5. Okay, now we know where it is. Most likely the pain is caused there. What are the pain triggers around there for this particular individual? And we have 2 options basically on those pain triggers. We either eliminate them completely if they're not necessary to allow the tissue to desensitize enough, or if the pattern is necessary for their job, then we have to learn how to alter it in a certain way to make sure the person operates under the biological tipping point of that tissue. And that varies heavily from person to person. Some people have very, very sensitized tissue because of too much abuse on that tissue, basically. Some people, they have like a large biological tipping point, so a lot has to go wrong for them to feel pain again. You got to know where that is for that particular individual, and that's why these assessments are so important. And then you guys, step 3, movement screen. You got to look at the person's movement inside of the gym, outside of the gym. If they're like a mountain climber, you have to look at their movement competency for that particular activity. That's critically important. I try to stay away from just very general and vague movement screens. There are some mechanical assessments I do for the spine that are somewhat general, but the movement, you have to see what is the person using movement for and see how competent they are at their starting level, and then figure out how to progress and regress depending on their situation. So the 5th important thing to consider, and this is critical for not only maintaining independence into old age, but just having good stability in your spine and hips in general, thus decreasing your chances of injury in those areas. So that's the ability to integrate your core. And this requires educating the client that, hey, the core is more than just your rectus abdominis muscle. Like people think just the 6-pack ab muscles is it. That's your core. But really, it's a system of a bunch of different muscles that all need to be trained to work as one muscle, one integrated unit. So the core is basically your whole body, in my opinion. But for the most part, the big players are your like rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, internal, external oblique, quadratus lumborum. All of the muscles of your butt are actually part of your core. Your pelvic floor muscles, there's these things called like multi-ifidi and your rector spinae muscles. There are many layers there. They're all part of your core. And believe it or not, your lats are actually a huge integrated, a huge part of your core as well. And they're also the biggest muscle in your upper body. And what needs to happen with good coaching is to train a person on how to integrate all of those muscles into one synchronized muscle during a particular lift or movement. And what I've learned also, it not only decreases, you can train these muscles aesthetically too, to look nicer, which is great. You can train them for function. It makes the person move with more efficiency. Thus, they can hike more, faster, with less energy, etc., etc. And also, they help keep you pain-free because they add stability to your spine and your hips. Your spine and hips kind of, for the most part, need to be seen as one unit too, from my experience. So, okay. Indirect things are also critically important, and people often overlook these. So, for example, if the person is, 8.5 out of 10 Americans right now are either overweight or obese. So obviously, if the person is very heavy and they have a lot of excess tissue very far away from their spine, for example, this is going to add a tremendous amount of compressive and shear penalties on the spine all day pretty much. So a good example is, guys, when you hold a weight like this very close to you, it's very, very light, like even a 25-pound plate. But you go like this and you hold it way in front of you, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, it becomes really heavy. And for you back pain patients, you also know that your spine starts hurting quite easily for the ones that are quite sensitized still. And the reason for this is because the forces on the spine are exaggerated and compounded the more weight you have further away from your body. So if your midsection is kind of like this fat, it's kind of all right. But if it's like way out here and kind of droopy, that's going to be providing a lot of compressive penalties and shear penalties on your spine at all times. And on top of that, if you have poor movement, it exaggerates all of these pain triggers a gargantuous amount, because the more weight you have, the more penalties there are on the back, so that's something to take into consideration. If you are overweight and you're a back pain patient, you have to basically, as a male, get your body fat somehow down to like 10 or 12%. That's it at any age, I would say, okay? And not only is that going to be great aesthetically and great for a lot of your metabolic health markers, but it's also going to help with your back pain. It's not like the one thing that's going to cure your back pain, although in some cases it may be the only thing that's kind of keeping your back pain alive, because your spine can't handle that much pressure. But it needs to be done as part of a plan to get you to not have any back pain, all right? And also I found just Another thing to the other extreme is being too muscular, especially, having really broad shoulders and big arms. This is obviously aesthetically appealing, it's nice, but also that could create some problems for back pain patients because of the way the forces work with your movement and having, again, so much weight outside of your spine parameters, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something to consider. And especially if a person becomes too muscular, 240-pound muscular person, there's still a lot of compressive penalties and shear penalties and torsion penalties on the spine as an obese 240-pound person, and stuff of this sort, and etc. So, okay. And the seventh thing is, I kind of repeated it here a little bit, guys. There's also, I could talk about this for many, many hours. It's a huge passion topic of mine that I've really dived into quite deeply since 2015. And luckily just had the right people step into my life too. Guys like named, just to give him a bit of credit here, Mike Axe was the first person I got assistance from. He's like former Army Ranger, very knowledgeable guy. Stuart McGill was a huge player, Paul Chek, Brian Carroll, and a few other people that I read mainly from books. But those are the big players that really helped me understand back pathologies and realistic ways of how to get out of back pain. So some things to look out for, guys. When visiting a chiropractor, they have to do all this stuff still with you. If they're just adjusting you, and let's say, okay, an adjustment creates more laxity in the spine, but you have too much laxity because you already had a disc herniation. You're not meeting the problem at the level of the problem. You got to meet the problem at the level of the problem, or the problem persists in anything health related, whether it be mental or physical or spiritual, okay? This is critical, and that's why you need that thorough assessment to know which level the problem is at. Or for a lot of people, it's at multiple levels. Not only, like, for example, what I'm seeing now in practice is not only people are very incompetent with their movement and don't know how to lift, even ones that have been lifting for 10, 15, 20 years, once you see their technique, it's like horrendous. And you wonder why they're always in pain. And then they say, oh, my arthritis is due to genetics. I'm like, no, man, it's not due to genetics. It's your movement is so bad. There's so much instability all over your body. And those poor joints are being loaded with a bunch of weight, but you don't even know how to stabilize those joints, And they might have a bit of muscle here and there, but it's like they're a complete mess, like fragile, like glass. Like any one wrong thing can cause them to collapse, all right? So if you go to a chiropractor, make sure, hey, where's my 2 to 3 hour assessment? Where's my education around my pain triggers? Like, I need someone to teach me how to lift properly for the tasks at hand that I need to accomplish. And I need someone to show me how to move properly outside of the gym, which is equally important because you spend so many more hours outside of the gym. So if you're moving incorrectly there, that's adding a lot of wear and tear on those poor joints. These guys are getting paid well. You have to ask them for these things. You got to hold their feet to the fire a bit, et cetera, okay? It's obviously, you got to take diet into consideration too, guys, because everything about you is made out of food, including the discs in your spine, In fact, when you're dehydrated, the first place your body extracts water from is your passive tissue. So if your disc is already quite flat because it's had a past injury, et cetera, and it's basically what happens, guys, is once you get that disc material to protrude out, you take an MRI and you see it protruding out, it looks quite disturbing, you know what I mean? You're like, ah, shit, that's it, man, I'm screwed. But really what happens is it takes a long time. Sometimes it takes 8 to 10 years for your disc to fully gristle over, presuming you don't re-injure it. But what happens is that protruding material, your body actually metabolizes out. It eats it. You can look at it that way. And then once it eats it away, it's no longer pressing on the nerve and you don't have any nerve pain. In some rare situations, there are nerves that impregnate the disc as a last-ditch resort of your body trying to get you to survive better in the external world. So it impregnates the discs of the back, and thus it causes pain within the disc, to get you to hopefully stop doing what you're doing to cause that pain. And guys, at this point, it's like I see some of the most, these a lot of the people are well-intentioned, but they're just seeing the most incompetent chiros and surgeons and trainers ever. And you see them getting shots, injections, surgeries. Like, people are like, oh, I have no disc whatsoever. I'm like, well, naturally your vertebrae will fuse together anyways if you just give it time. You don't need mechanical fusion oftentimes through surgery. And they do all this stuff, and I'm like, dude, has anyone even spoke to you about your back pain and what is actually causing the pain? Then have they educated you on how to avoid those triggers? Have they educated on you how to lift properly? Because I guarantee you, like, 99% of people I see that go to the gym regularly might actually have good physiques. Their lifting technique is horrendous. And then they're wondering, like, why is my shoulder hurt? Why is my back hurt? Why is my neck hurt all the time? Et cetera, et cetera. Has anyone educated you even on proper nutrition? Because remember, everything in your body, like I mentioned, is made out of food. No, I would say no. Especially with 9 out of 10 Americans being metabolically sick now and 8.5 out of 10 being overweight or obese. That's a huge indication that the foundation has to be so broken for people to not even know how to manage something as simple as their blood sugar and blood pressure or cholesterol or body fat, with just basic, absolute basic, the ABCs. Just so you guys know, to be metabolically healthy, metabolic health is kind of like, basically I would say your body fat percentage, resting blood glucose levels, blood pressure, triglycerides, and HDL. And to be within range in those things, it's like so easy. When you catch a person that's not in range in any of those things, it's kind of like running into a person that doesn't know the ABCs and they're trying to tell you they can speak English. It's like, dude, you don't even know the alphabet at this point. You know what I mean? Or you may know, but your application of it sucks. And it's not, oftentimes the power isn't in what you know, it's what you do with it. You know what I mean? Are you able to put it to work in a culture that has normalized mental and physical pathology? Again, 2025, Americans are mentally and physically the sickest humans in all of human history. Are you able to put it to work? Joey, good to see you, man. I'm kind of wrapping up here, but these are all important things. And you guys, that's for chiros. Surgeons, kind of the same exact thing. I don't care how many years of experience, if they're an MD, if they're a director of a sports facility. If they're not doing all of this stuff with you, they're total bullshit, in my opinion, okay? Same with influencers online. That includes me, okay? I never met you guys personally. I don't know your particular situation, and there are no absolutes. So when you listen to an influencer online and they're saying, just do this stretch and it's going to relieve your pain, it's like, how do you even know what's causing my pain? How do you even know? They don't. And if you catch an influencer going like, just massage this little muscle or just stretch out this little muscle or do this little thing or exercise, and all of your back troubles will just disappear. Instant bogus, totally incompetent. Do not listen to this person and move on, okay? Because you will get injured more listening to these people. You got to be careful. Okay, so I hope that evens it out. Another important thing, guys, is if you're struggling with low back pain, you don't need to become a master, but at least have a fundamental understanding of the anatomy of the lower back. This is an amazing book that I always lean heavily on. It's so good. I think it's like somewhat hit and miss on print. It's an older book, but it's so much great information. And you guys, I'm not making any money off of this, just recommending it. It has like cool picture diagrams that are easy to understand. The verbiage here and there may be hit and miss, but if you're really dedicated to it, just, you can Google search what a lot of these words mean and stuff like that. I mean, look at those cool illustrations, because when you're healing your back, you need to kind of be able to see inside of it. Just like a car mechanic, they kind of know what's under the hood already. So when you tell them, like, my car is making this noise or this isn't starting this way, they can kind of already start putting together a mental game plan of what to do. And that's important to do, okay? So I spend a lot of time actually educating my clients and working with them on learning the anatomy of the back and the anatomy of their particular injury, etc., etc. I mean, look at these cool pictures. I'm kind of a nerd for this stuff, though. Okay, so I really like studying it. So you can kind of see the pictures describe, you know, like where all the nerves are. So if a person is having like, you know, a disc herniation in the L4, L5, what nerve it could possibly be pressing on and where that nerve kind of travels throughout the body, etc., etc. You know, the anatomy of the nerves itself is like super, super cool to study, all that stuff. So remember, guys, this is your body. You know, you only get one. With how healthcare right now in the US is going, basically, unless you just want to be medically drugged out of your mind and given quick 5-minute assessments and rushed into surgery at times unnecessarily, like, you're your only hope, man. So you can join the medically drugged out hordes of America, and you look at them, they all look freaking terrible, all crazy amounts of denial and gaslighting themselves on that they're healthy or something of that sort. Or you can, you know, learn how to master your mind and body, because those are the vehicles towards you being able to survive better in the external world and experience it in a good way. Because you guys remember, if everything is going super well for you in your life, but you're like physically sick, you know, you have like low back pain, your conscious experience, your subjective experience of how well your life is going is going to be at the ceiling of how mentally and physically healthy you are. So if your mental and physical health is like at a C-, but the rest of your life is at like at an A+, your subjective experience of the external world will be at a C- or below, stuff of this sort. So this is important, you know, because when something breaks, again, it's not like a car mechanic. You can go and they just replace your filter or whatever. Again, I don't know anything about cars. This is like biological tissue. It's far more complicated to fix, you know? And again, if you don't learn this stuff and you don't learn how to take care of yourself, there's really not much hope outside of just being like medically drugged out into oblivion, which in my opinion, I've never seen it work well. In fact, just over long periods of time, and again, it just throws off the biochemistry of the individual even more. And then you can get into the intricate topics of like, most of these drugs are just used as a crutch by the individual to not create any real meaningful change. But remember, like medical drugs also, outside of just some limited use of antibiotics, for example, don't really cure or prevent anything. You know what I mean? They just kind of subdue symptoms. So like when you're depressed and you take antidepressants, trust me, all of those things in the external and internal world that led to that depression are still there. It's just you've kind of like numbed yourself out to it for a short time. But then you'll see, you know, those symptoms creep back up with more intensity, and they typically require higher doses of antidepressants. And then when eventually one is maxed out, then you got to take 2 antidepressants, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then blah, 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 blah. And then, you know, a lot of those antidepressants cause change in the gut microbiome. You know, then you start developing digestive issues for a lot of patients. And when people get off of them, they're increased chance of suicide. It's supposed to prevent suicide, you know. So it's so silly, man. But like they say, you know, sucker born every minute. So, but it's up to you. The good thing is with a lot of these chronic health issues, you're doing it to yourself, as one of my mentors, Brian Carroll, told me at one point. You're doing it to yourself. And it kind of a light bulb went on in my head, and I knew he was right. You know, I am doing it to myself. And that's where all the power is at, because if you're doing it to yourself, you can literally stop anytime. And if you don't know how to, then you gotta seek education on how to do that. You have 2 options, and that's it. You can become your own mechanic, which is a long and honorable journey, and you should do that. Or you could just hire a mentor, a good one, that ideally has a long history of successful clients and, you know, does all these thorough assessments and treats the person that's causing the disease instead of the disease. Because inevitably you got to change the belief system and education that led to the problems, and then usually the problems disappear, most always actually. And they got to do all that stuff. But if you do even the mentor route, don't be kind of like a blind follower. still become your own mechanic as well. But the good thing is having a mentor will definitely fast track your journey so much. So hope this helps. Yes, it's quite a bit of work, but if you want an honest answer and solution, this is how you have to look at your problems, any health problems, especially low back pain, okay? So I hope this helps you guys, save a lot of time and money, and helps you show like what an honest journey looks like, okay? So you can have honest answers. Okay, wishing you guys the best, okay? Have a good weekend.